Let's talk.
John Brown.
Southern Imagining, a literary and cultural history of the far southern hemisphere, is a new book by Elleke Boehmer. And Elleke is a professor of, refresh my memory, Elleke. Good morning to you, by the way. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning. It's Professor of World Literature in English at the University of Oxford.
Right, world literature in English. I mean, that is, if you like, somewhat of a broad remit, to put it mildly.
It is, but it has to do with the spread of the English language around the world, and that a lot of different people are writing amazing poems and novels and memoirs in that language, from right around the planet.
So when it comes to this particular book, Southern Imagining, I suppose you make the valid point that we tend to look at the world and sort of northern hemisphere heavy, because obviously up until sort of 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and that was kind of all that the world was basically, or history was basically, and apologies to listeners in other parts of the world, was Europe central, wasn't it, basically?
Well, yes, from the point of view of Europe, but obviously there were peoples living in the southern hemisphere who weren't waiting to be discovered by Europe, and they weren't part of Europe's known world. But you raise another interesting question there, which is that the reason why we are so north-centered in terms of how we see the planet is because most of the world's peoples live in the northern hemisphere, and that great big land bridge that extends from Eurasia and then around the Bering Sea to North America. There's a great arc of land there where most of us live.
So what was the spark, if you like, the genesis behind Southern Imagining? And it's just not a case of, literature, culture, art being, the Southern Hemisphere being, if you like, Europe-centric with a bit of a tan and what we would call a strange accent and having Christmas in the sun. There is a definite point, isn't there? There is a definite sort of cultural viewpoint that comes from living in the Southern Hemisphere, which we are sort of exploring here.
That's right, and that cultural viewpoint has been something that I've been thinking about for a long time. Actually, I mean, I've been this book, in a way, it took about 4 years to write, but it's been decades in the making. I myself, and I think this is important, Southern Hemisphere born. I was born in Durban on the lip of the Indian Ocean, and I was always struck about what I saw as the normal way of seeing the world was unusual to many people, including my Europe-born, my Dutch parents. So that's something that I wanted to convey. And what I also wanted to think about is how, when a whole range of writers in English, like, say, Samuel Coleridge or D.H. Lawrence, went into the Southern Hemisphere and wrote about it, they talked about being confused, distrait, upside down, maddened, feverish. And I wanted to think about why that was so, why people were so upside down, going into experiencing a different spin.
Why? I mean, when they talk about being feverish and confused, I mean, presumably that's because they've got no cultural anchor. Because what you think of as Europe doesn't have the same. There are very few sort of comforting sort of not moral anchors. But you're saying cultural anchors that you can attach yourself to once you're straight out of a European-based city, for example.
Yeah, exactly. There aren't those cultural anchors, for which a kind of metaphor is that there isn't the North Pole, which has always been the navigational point that northern mariners have used, and of course they lose that as they cross the equator and go into the south. But there's something else too, and that is that everything becomes more fluid. It isn't just a different spin. It's also that it's an oceanic world, the southern hemisphere. It's what is called the blue hemisphere. It is about 81% ocean. Isn't that fantastic and strange to think about? So there's something that's very island-like and archipelagic, as in an archipelago, about the southern hemisphere islands and continents. And it's also, and this is something that I explore in the book, it's also very, very cold and forbidding. You know, the ocean is very turbulent, if not tumultuous, down in the southern hemisphere.
Well, yeah, they have the Great Southern Ocean, of course, and the Roaring Forties, and that sort of thing, which people don't look at. And it actually is interesting because if you say Southern Hemisphere, people will be thinking Tahiti. They'll be thinking of sort of Gauguin's sort of, Tahitian paintings, and everybody sort of lolling about and being tended to by dusky maidens. But actually, on the flip side of that, of course, we have this foreboding. We have South Georgia, but also being oceanic. And being an island, and I'm not even start to pronounce archipelago, the thing, but that immediately made me think of the Norse, because again, it's a polar opposite, literally, but it's an oral tradition, as you find within, and using the wrong parlance, within sort of native communities or First Nation communities. It's an oral tradition rather than a written tradition.
Yes, correct. The difference being, there are many parallels between, if you like, far northern imagining and southern imagining. The difference being that, Laplanders interacted with Inuit people kind of across the Arctic.
Yeah.
Which after all is an ocean, not a continent, unlike the Antarctic. Whereas the peoples of the southern hemisphere were very remote, the one from the other. They had to travel, as Pacific Islanders did, across vast swathes of ocean to reach each other. So I have a lot of fun in the book with thinking about how they might nonetheless, and here I'm sort of raking the air with sort of scare quotes, how they might nonetheless have not communicated, but in some sense communed through stargazing the same skies, and actually, and to me, this is one of the revelations that came from researching and writing the book, actually seeing the same animals, animal patterns in the sky, seeing rares and ostriches and emus, the same flightless birds, partly because those southern continents were once part of one big continent called Gondwanaland. So there are also, geological connections between those very, very, otherwise very, very remote spaces. So they read the land in similar ways, and they looked at the skies in similar ways. And I just find that so amazing that they communed without actually communicating.
And I suppose another thing is the fact that it is very easy for sort of Northern Europeans, or especially sort of poets, to if you like, you say they can confuse, but also inspire, because this, again, if you're thinking about 18th century, 19th century, there is no industrial revolution per se happening in the Southern Hemisphere in the way that is in the North.
No.
So there are no dark satanic mills, as Blake would write. So therefore, it is if you are a romantic and you want to say, this is how, one is getting back to nature or the old gods, etc. Because they're, Patagonia, so Chile, those areas, Africa, of course, which is, completely wrong parts, but a dark continent full of strange and, strange and fascinating cultures. As we said, the Southern Oceans, etc. You can, if you like, you can bring that look of, if you're looking for the wild man, which is obviously a counterpoint to the industrialization, and not in the romantic ways of a Shelley or a Byron, for example.
Yeah. That's right. The further interesting thing connected to those dark satanic mills is that, of course, and again, I talk about this in Southern Imagining, is that however those southern reaches of the world supplied many of the raw materials for those dark satanic mills, and also supplied, for example, the beef stock, OXO cubes, that were the fuel for the working classes who operated the dark satanic mills. And this is why Herman Melville's amazing novel Moby Dick is so important in the book, because Melville, although he was a northerner, in New York born, he, partly because of his seafaring experiences, he absolutely saw that the cities of the north, he writes about this, that the cities of the northern hemisphere were run on whale oil, mainly fished in southern waters, because they were very, very, rich in, and again, this is difficult to say, but very, very rich in whales, and in particular southern right whales. So he points this out, that the great machine of the Industrial Revolution is run on the fuel that comes from the southern hemisphere. So it's also, and that's important to add, an exploited hemisphere. It has been the site right across. I mean, the oceans and the lands right across, they are the sites of extraction.
When it comes to something like this, how do you keep it in a narrative that doesn't go to sort of like 900 pages? To be honest with you, because you're dealing with such a huge sweep of time, of place. There is no, I know we're calling it Southern Imagining, but there's no broad brushstroke Southern Hemisphere culture in the same way there's no broad brushstroke culture going from the Urals to the Rockies, for example. So how do you boil all that down into a narrative?
Well, good question. And there are several answers to that question. One is that I do like a challenge, and that was, how to write this book and how to do those cross connections and how to bring it all together was something that I kept coming back to. Am I getting it right? And I also I kept reassuring myself and sometimes comforting myself that this didn't have to be the be all and end all book. I hope that it opens a conversation, but that there will be, further conversations to be had. I actually think there's a whole book, for example, to be written about Herman Melville, and how he got this thing. Funnily enough, he wasn't confused. He was able to see the planet in the round. So there are more books on this subject. It was actually also really kind of freeing for me, kind of liberating to write and think outside the nation. We so much think of literature, and this is something about world literature, we so much think of literature as tied to a national voice. Peoples have used their literature to say something about themselves. But actually, they've also used their literature to say something about the wider world around them. And it's that I was interested in bringing out. When different peoples see connections between each other, and this was really important and exciting to write about at a time when we see nations once again so much at war and kind of pitted against each other and not agreeing. So it was exciting to create patterns between and across countries and to see what they had in common rather than what split them apart.
I mean, it's interesting you say that because, people tend to sort of lump the whole of, South American literature. And I know, that's particularly, especially after the weekend's events, but, a particular way of looking. And then people always say, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, etc., 100 Years of Solitude. But there is no one voice, is there, to that entire region? And again, it is a completely different and kaleidoscopic way of looking at the world.
Yeah, kaleidoscopic is a brilliant word. Thank you. I might use that. But yes, to look at the world through different but related facets was really interesting to do. And often when I had conversations with people about this book in the process of writing it, they wanted to come back to the nation. They wanted to talk about, say, Australian literature, or they wanted to talk about Zimbabwean literature. that's very valid. Those are really, really important bodies of writing. But it's also interesting to think about how they interconnect, and there is so much that connects them. One of the other things that I talk about is Southern Light, how there's a particular way in which it has to do with the oceanic qualities of the Southern Hemisphere, but there's a luminosity to the light of the Southern Hemisphere that so many writers pick up on.
And also, of course, Africa, big sky, and Patagonia, big sky is another one.
Huge skies, exactly. And also this sense of and this is right the way across these different countries, this idea of being on some kind of veranda or kind of stoop or porch of the world, that you're looking out from an edge. That is something that everyone shares. Sometimes they're experiencing on a mountaintop, looking out over a plain. Sometimes they're experiencing on the beach, looking out. Sometimes, they're experiencing on the deck of a ship. But this is a kind of universal across these writings.
And here's the thing, because I'm just thinking about that being on a porch or being on a ship. I'm talking about big skies, but as opposed to the hurly-burly sort of introspective world of European literature or Northern Hemisphere literature, you think about the psychoanalysis that goes on in the States, perhaps Southern Hemisphere writing has much more of that model, again, that chill factor to it. It can take that step back. It's not so frenetic pace because, as we said at the beginning of the interview, it's not that hurly-burly, post-industrialized, technocratic world in which Northern Hemisphere people tend to live.
That is true, and writers also, including actually Northern writers, go to these places to seek that kind of more open, less kind of congested view, and it's something that I think I advocate for in the book, that we, through this writing, through enjoying this writing, we can actually ourselves, even if we're in the hurly-burly here in the Northern Hemisphere, we can experience something of that view from the edge.
If somebody we've piqued, and we should do, listeners, if you've piqued the interest in this one, apart from going to our own virtual bookstop and ordering your own book, obviously, which you can do, listeners, by going to tre.radio, but are there any sort of, I was going to say set texts, and that'll keep the students happy. But what would you? Apart from Moby Dick, I suppose. What should we be looking? Are there authors that we can easily just pluck out the hand? And go. These are, if you like, your entry level into the world of Southern imaging.
Great question. The thing is, and it's to do with the kind of the farness, the distance, the perceived, at least from the Northern Hemisphere, remoteness of some of these writers, that it isn't that easy to pluck these books from the shelves at your local bookshop. And that's something that I'm hoping to change with this book, to pique interest so that people will, clamor and, ask publishers and bookshops to publish and to stock these books. You would do very well by going to your old familiars, Melville and Samuel Taylor Coleridge and D.H. Lawrence in his bizarre novel Kangaroo, if you wanted a kind of stepping stone. But beyond that, I would say, seek out some of the amazing Australian Indigenous poets who are fantastic and very inspiring in writing about the stars of the Southern Hemisphere in kind of dialogue with Crosby, Stills and Nash. Jazz Money, for example, is a poet that I found particularly inspiring. Natalie Harkin is another. There are some incredible writers from Southern Africa, from Zimbabwe, which I already mentioned, who are worth exploring. And then, why not learn a bit of Spanish or read in translation? Fantastic Argentine writers like Samantha Schweblin.
That's fascinating, yeah, because, I mean, obviously because normally people think, oh, it's all about, if you're reading South American literature, it's all got to be about politics or whatever else, or trying to, reindustrialize great swathes of South America. But it doesn't have to be like that, does it? There is a connection with those sort of writers, especially and obviously we're based in Spain, so there'll be a particular interest in Latin America, South Americans.
That's right. I mean, there is an astonishing diversity, and the writers are actually themselves grappling with how they can better communicate with, global writers, with writers in the North. There is this sense, and it's something that I've experienced myself as somebody born in the Southern Hemisphere. There is this sense that the cultures of these countries don't really matter because they are so far away. If you think about your daily news, the news, with a capital N, doesn't come from the Southern Hemisphere unless there's a disaster or a plane goes down or, an island explodes. I was looking at some of the reviews of the year and the reviews of the quarter century of this, that we've had of the 21st century over New Year. And, again and again, in fact, without exception, the news stories did not feature events from the Southern Hemisphere. It's incredible. Someone like Elon Musk thinks that he can use the Southern Indian Ocean as a kind of dumping ground for his satellites, and flights between Australia and South Africa are routinely interrupted by the fact that he's doing a kind of satellite dump. Again, there's a sense of, it doesn't matter. It's sort of, it's out there. And that's why I think these poems and these novels are so important, because they are themselves grappling with that problem.
The book is called Southern Imagining, a literary and cultural history of the far Southern Hemisphere. It's by Dr. Elleke Boehmer, who is speaking to today. If people want to find you online, but listeners, you can go to our own virtual bookstore, click on the front cover, and a well-known distribution film, it'll be winging its way to you. But always remember to support your local bookstore as well. Where can people find you online, Elleke? If you want to continue the conversation and say lovely things to you.
I have a website, ellekeboehmer.com, and my contact details are available there. I would love to dialogue with readers about this book. As I've already made clear, it was a passion for me to write, and I'm very passionate about the ideas in the book. And I think it's really important that we develop or learn through our reading some of these Southern Hemisphere perspectives, because they help us to see the world more holistically, help us to kind of see the world in the round.
The book is called Southern Imaging, a literary and cultural history of the far Southern Hemisphere. It's by Elleke Boehmer, who is speaking today. Thank you so much for your time today.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you very, very much. And thank you for beginning with Crosby, Stills and Nash, which is truly one of my favorite songs.
That was half the fun. I mean, I was looking forward to the interview before, but absolutely. Elleke Boehmer, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.